What's up, everybody? What's going on? Welcome to another episode of the Lead From Here podcast. I'm Jason. Today I wanted to talk about data and using data to make things happen in your company. And this is kind of building off of episode number 67 because I had a few people reach out and say, hey, I've tried to make change. Like, I did everything I could. I talked to every person and I tried to get change to happen. The one thing that was pretty consistent in all of those things was they kind of lacked the data to back up why they needed to do it. They read about it, or they heard about it, or they thought about it and came up with the idea and had a feeling that it would work. And some companies, this will work really well. If you're a smaller company, if you are a company that loves and is built on experimentation, you may just be able to do that. You're going to have measurable things to say whether it was a success or a failure. You may be able to just say, I think this could work. And then they're going to say, okay, here's a team. Most companies, especially most large companies, that's not going to work. It's not going to happen. Not only do you need to have data to prove that it does work, but you also have to have data or some kind of industry trends or things that are happening in your company or other groups or competitors that shows that, hey, if we make this change, we would see increased revenue or a drop in employee churn or anything, whatever data point you're going to go for. But ultimately, if you don't bring that to the table with, hey, this is what's happening in the industry, or I read about this in a magazine about one of our competitors. A magazine, geez, when was the last time anybody read an actual magazine? On an email thread or wherever, I heard about this and I think it might be valuable for us to do. And based on the industry, this is what we'll see data-wise. Now, finding that data is much more complicated, and if you guys throw me comments or emails and want me to dive deeper into how I would go about finding data, depending on what I'm doing, I would be happy to do an episode like that. But ultimately, data is king. Like, you have to bring data. So let's say that happens. You brought the data to him. You said, this is what's happening in the industry, or this competitor's doing this. We're going to try this. They're, okay, cool. Now you have to go test that. And when you test it, you can't just try it and see what happens. You have to understand what you're going to measure, how you're going to measure it, and then what success looks like. You're going to take a guess. You may be wrong, and the success may look a little different, but ultimately, you should have a good idea of what you want to see, because that data you found initially of like what a competitor is doing or what's happening in the industry, it will help you understand that ultimately what you need to do is this, and it will have this outcome. And finding those two, again, is not easy. But once you have that, you have to make sure you know exactly what you're measuring. You have to measure it, and then you have to see, an actual improvement. You have to see that data and say, this is what happens to us normally, and this is what happens when we test this. And if you can do that, your opportunity to make that change or implement that policy or procedure greatly increases. They still could say no. Absolutely. It could be like, this is not a big enough gain or a big enough percentage gain. I would disagree with that point, but ultimately it could happen. The last thing I want to talk about around data is it's not just around changing policies or processes or doing your business a different way. It's also about changing perception. So let's say you're on a team that's doing fine, but you have an executive that, based on some feeling they have, or they see something happening, or just by one interaction with the team or somebody on the team, they're like, I think this team's struggling. Why? Well, I just have that assumption. Ultimately, perception is 9/10 reality. So if perception is 9/10 reality, and somebody in executive leadership says, listen, this team, it's okay, it's not great, they don't seem like they're doing much, and it seems like they're, not a solid team, and they're having some struggles. It's like, if you're a leader that doesn't love data and doesn't get into the weeds and understand the minutia of what's happening in the team, not the code, not the sales, like the conversations. Maybe it is if you're in sales. Maybe you do need to listen to the conversation depending on the data you're finding. But ultimately, what you need to understand is get into the minutia of the team. Don't do the work. Don't watch people do the work. But understand the output. Understand the input. Understand what's happening within the group. And then utilize that to build a visual or a spreadsheet of data that shows this is actually this team is effective, or it isn't. And that's your opportunity to improve and fix and change. That's your job as a leader, to understand if something's wrong, what do you do to fix it? So data isn't just about driving change in your company when it comes to policies and procedures. It's also about driving change for your people, driving change for somebody's career path, driving change for the perception of a team or an employee. It all depends on what the situation is, but I can tell you there's not many situations where data is not going to help. Because the great thing about data is it also takes the emotion out of it. If you go to somebody that generally doesn't want to take good feedback, if you go to them and tell them they're not doing a good job, they're going to get super emotional. They're going to get upset. They're going to get defensive. If you come to them and say, listen, looking at the data, it looks like you were at this level, now you're at this level. Is everything okay? How can I help? It's a very different conversation because they can't say that they're doing a great job because the data shows they're not. They're struggling. And that happens. Everybody ebbs and flows throughout their life through loss, grief, frustration, burnout, all the things that can happen to an individual. And you have to help them through all that. You're their leader. That's your job. That's what this whole 6-minute video is about, is get really comfortable with the data and really think about and understand how you can utilize data to effectively drive a team, an individual, a company forward. If you can do that, you will unlock a ton of potential in yourself and in the people around you. I hope this was helpful. If you like what you're hearing, please like, subscribe, follow. It would mean the world to me. If you have questions, hit me up, Jason at leadfromhere.co, any of the social media platforms. Hope you're doing well. Take care.